All right, welcome back, Hononegah, Algebra 1. We're at the end of 6.1. 6.1 has all the exponent rules, so we're going to go ahead and do a test over just 6.1 and the exponent rules. So this is the worksheet 6.1 test review number 2, if you're watching this. So here we go. Rule number 1, when multiplying like-based items, and I'm not a real big fan of the parentheses here, but when multiplying like-based items together, you're going to add the exponents. So that's rule number 1, multiplying, add exponents. Rule number 2, there's two things to deal with, or this isn't rule number 2, it's rule number 3, but still, two things you're going to have to deal with. Numbers are treated differently than exponents. When dividing with exponents, you subtract exponents. Now, when you're dividing a number, which is 12 divided by 20, then you need to reduce it just like you would any other fraction. So 12/20 reduces to 3/5. Same with the next one. I'm going to multiply their numbers, but I'm going to add their exponents. So numbers are treated differently than exponents. Make sure that you multiply the numbers in this case, but you add the exponents. Next one, if you have a parenthesis raised to an exponent, everything in that parenthesis is raised to the exponent, including the negative sign. So be careful. Now, rule number 2 says if you have a power raised to a power that you multiply the exponents. So x to the 6th times 5, or excuse me, the 6th power times the 5th power. And so y to the 45th. Now, any number needs to be evaluated, including the negative sign. This is one of the most missed questions on the test. Negative 2 to the 5th power is negative 32. So make sure that you try your calculator out there and make sure that you put it in parentheses when doing this. Next one, negative 3 to the 2nd times negative 3 to the 3rd makes negative 3 to the 5th. Now, again, all numbers probably should be evaluated. So negative 3 to the 5th power is negative 243 using my calculator. Next one, everything in the parentheses should be raised to the 2nd in this case. And again, all numbers should be evaluated. So negative 3 to the 2nd power is a positive 9, 64, and then x to the 10th. So everything in the parentheses raised to the 2nd power, including the negative sign. Anytime you have a negative raised to a power, put it in parentheses. Numbers get treated differently than exponents. So let's say if I started with the x's, x to the 14th, x to the 3rd, add the exponents, x to the 17th. Y to the 3rd, y to the 4th makes y to the 7th. And then all I have to do is multiply the actual numbers together. No parentheses, multiple fractions though. So I'm going to multiply straight across the top. So act like the top is one question. Negative 72, x to the 9th, y to the 15th. Now treat the bottom like a different question. 2, x to the 3rd, y to the 8th. Notice that I added the exponents. Now let's deal with the fraction. Negative 72 divided by 2 is negative 36. Now that is a negative number, not a negative exponent, so be careful there. X to the 9th over x to the 3rd makes x to the 6th. You're going to subtract the exponents. And then y to the 15th over y to the 8th makes y to the 7th. Again, I'm going to subtract the exponents. Everything in the parentheses needs to get raised to the power. So negative 3 to the 3rd. X to the 0 to the 3rd would be 0 because you're ultimately multiplying. Still y to the 0, y to the negative 2nd. Now, anything to the 0 power, just automatically cross it off or put it as a 1. Because anything to the 0 power is 1, and so 1 times negative 3 to the 3rd. So that's negative 27. And then the y has a negative exponent. The rules about negative exponents are, if you have a negative exponent on top, it needs to go on the bottom as a positive exponent. If the negative exponent is on the bottom, it needs to go to the top as a positive exponent. It means reciprocal of. It's in the wrong place. So negative power means you need to move it, not negative numbers. Notice the negative 27 didn't move because it's just a negative number. Ooh, this one's going to be a little bit lengthy. 2 to the negative 3rd, x to the 0, y to the 6th. That's taking the top to the negative 3rd power. 3 to the negative 3rd, y to the negative 15th. As I said in the previous example, anything with a negative power needs to get moved, and anything to 0 power is just 1. So the 2 to the negative 3rd needs to be 2 to the 3rd on the bottom. y to the 6th stays on the top, 3 to the 3rd moves to the top, and y to the 15th moves to the top. Now, 3 to the 3rd using my calculator is 27. 2 to the 3rd using my calculator is 8. And then y to the 6th times y to the 15th. I would take the exponents and add them and getting y to the 21st. Scrolling back up here. There you go. Anything in a parenthesis raised to an exponent, including the negative sign. Now, this one, everything's going to be to the 0 power. So if I truly wanted to write this out, it would be negative 5 to the 0, x to the 0, y to the 0, which makes 1 times 1 times 1, which is just 1. Next one, negative 1 to the 4th, x to the 4th. So negative 1 to the 4th power is 1, x to the 4th, and I'm multiplying all this together to get just x to the 4th. I have a parenthesis raised to an exponent. Everything in that parenthesis needs to get raised to that exponent. So negative 5, x to the negative 3rd, y, there's the first one. Negative 2 to the 3rd, x to the negative 18th, and y to the 6th. Now, some of you are going to not like the negative powers, which is fine. So if it's a negative power, it needs to get moved to the bottom. If it's a positive power, it stays on top. So that's what I have so far. Notice I have an x and an x on the bottom. X to the 3rd times x to the 18th makes x to the 21st. And now it's just the numbers. Negative 2 to the 3rd power is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 5 is positive 40. So rules of exponents. Numbers in front, add the exponents. So negative 3 times 10 is negative 30. M to the 3rd times m to the 2nd is m to the 5th. And then n to the 4th. Anything in a parenthesis raised to an exponent. Everything in that parenthesis needs to get raised to the exponent, including the negative sign. Negative 2 to the 3rd power is 8. Now, x to the 3rd on top, x to the 6th on bottom. Subtract the exponents. Because there were more on the bottom than there is on top, you would put the answer on the bottom. Now, some people say top minus bottom, which isn't wrong. So when I subtract 3 minus 6, I get negative 3, which means it needs to be the reciprocal of, meaning on the bottom of the fraction. Next one, the negative 9 is just a negative number, but the x to the negative 5th power needs to move because a negative power means the reciprocal of. Continuing to get more complicated, and we're starting to get to the end of this section now. Negative 3 to the negative 2nd, x to the negative 6th, there's the top. 4 to the negative 2nd, x to the positive 8, and y to the negative 2nd. As I have said in numerous examples, if you have a negative power, it needs to move. So the negative 3 to the 2nd needs to go to the bottom. X to the 6th needs to go to the bottom. X to the 8th needs to stay on the bottom. Y to the 2nd needs to move to the top. And positive 4, to the 2nd needs to move to the top. So all I did so far is just move things around. Now, the x is on the bottom. Because you have x to the 6th times x to the 8th, you would make x to the 14th because you add the exponents. And now it's just a matter of the numbers. 4 to the 2nd power is 16. Negative 3 to the 2nd power is 9. And that's my answer. Numbers, negative powers. So the 16 stays, m to the 4th stays, m to the 9th stays, even the negative 12 stays, but the n moves because it has a negative power. Numbers and exponents get treated differently. Numbers, exponents, I would subtract those two exponents, and because there's more on the bottom than there is on top, when I go to subtract, I get m to the 5th on the bottom. Numbers, I reduce them. 16 over negative 12, if I reduce that fraction, is negative 4/3. This one, a lot of negative stuff. So negative 5 stays, 30 stays. N to the 8th moves to the n to the 8th, moves to the bottom because it has a negative exponent on top. N to the 4th moves to the top. P to the 3rd moves to the bottom. P to the 5th stays there. T stays there. And t to the 3rd moves to the top. So now let's combine some stuff here. Negative 5 over 30 makes negative 1/6. End of the fourth on top, end of the eighth on the bottom. Those two makes end of the fourth on the bottom. P to the fifth and P to the third, both on the bottom. So I'm going to add their exponents. And T to the first and T to the third makes T to the fourth, because I'm going to add the exponents again. So if you're multiplying, you add exponents. If you're subtracting, or if you're dividing, you subtract exponents. Everything in the parentheses raised to the negative power, or raised to the power. Negative exponents need to move. That's basically all I would say to you. If it's a negative exponent on top, I'm going to move it to the bottom. If it's a negative exponent on the bottom, I'm going to move it to the top. Both of these are already on the bottom now. So 3 to the third is 27 times 10 is 270. A to the second, A to the ninth makes A to the seventh. Now there's nothing left on top, so just leave it as a 1. There's nothing left. I feel like I've said this numerous times, but anything in a parenthesis raised to a power, everything in that parenthesis is raised to that power. So let's talk about the x's now. X to the 10th and x to the 8th. These two are being multiplied together, makes x to the 18th. Y to the 22nd, and now I'm down to the numbers. This is 4 and 9, and so I multiply those two together and get 36. 21 is a bit of a trick question. Because this is a binomial, I would multiply the exponents, but I have to stop there. 2x minus 3, because there's a minus sign in between, it means there's two terms called a binomial. And so 2x minus 3 cannot be taken to the 10th power with the same rules that we've used previously. So you are done with this question. Anything taken to an exponent. Now, the negative 4 is not in the parentheses. So therefore, the negative 4 is not taken to the exponent. And so this is 1. And so negative 4, x to the 24th, z to the 12th. I can't do anything else with that, because the negative 4 was not inside the parenthesis. It is not taken to the third power. Next one. The bottom, x to the positive 6. Y the negative 10th, because when you have a power raised to a power, you're going to multiply the powers. Negative power means that it needs to move. So the 5 and the y to the third doesn't go anywhere. The y to the 10th needs to move to the top, and the x to the negative second needs to move to the bottom. Both y's on top, so I would add their exponents. Both x's on the bottom, so I would add their exponents. And now probably the hardest question of all. Negative 5, x to the negative second, y to the fifth. Negative 3, x to the fifth, y to the 0. Now, anything to an exponent, I need to multiply the exponents. Tons of places where there's negative exponents. So now, I'm going to move things around. This negative exponent needs to get moved to the bottom. So I have a y to the fifth on top. This is just 1, so if you want to get rid of that, you can. Next one, negative 3 to the second. The x to the sixth needs to get moved to the bottom. The y to the first needs to get moved to the top, and the x squared. So now let's multiply straight across. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space. Multiply straight across. So I'm going to deal with the top first. Negative 3 squared is 9. 9 times negative 5. Y to the 12th, y to the first, y to the fifth makes y to the 18th. The bottom, negative 3. Now I just got to add all the exponents. X to the fifth, x to the second, x to the sixth, and x to the second makes x to the 15th. The only thing I have left now is the actual fraction. The y is done. The x is done. Negative 45 divided by negative 3 is positive 15. And that's your answer. Scientific notation. So now they want me to put this in standard form. So they're giving it to you in scientific notation. They want to put it in standard form. So 4 times 10 to the 8th means I need to go 8 decimal places bigger. So notice the decimal point used to be there, and so I'm going to move it 8 places to the right, and get my new number in a non-scientific notation would be 400 million. Next, I'm going to move it 5 decimal places smaller. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th decimal place would be the 9. So again, 9.124 times 10 to the negative 5th. Next, I want to go the other way. So I'm counting decimal places. So 8.109, that's putting the decimal between 1 and 10. And now you have to count how many decimal places. 3, 6, 9, 12 decimal places. So we're talking about times 10 to the 12th. Next one, I want the decimal place to be there. So 5 times 10, and now I'm counting decimal places. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we're talking about a small number, so times 10 to the negative 11th. 1.234. Now, this one's probably not very nice because they want you to include all the numbers or the significant numbers. So there's quite a few numbers there that we have to actually account for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decimal places. So writing that in scientific notation. Last but not least, we're going to now do some operations with scientific notation. So the 2 and the 2.5, I'd pull out my calculator and multiply those two together. 10 to the negative 29th and 10 to the 12th. By rule, I would add their exponents, so I get 10 to the negative 17th. The next one is not very nice. 5.5 to the 9th power. This is going to be a really, really big number. So 5.5 raised to the 9th power. 4605366.584 times 10 to the 45th. Now, remember, those of you that watched the video from day 4, too big, too small, just right. This number is way too big. It needs to get smaller by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal places, which means this needs to go up by 6 decimal places. So 4.605366584 times 10 to the 51st. Now, we're not going to do anything that big on the test. That's probably a pretty bad example to put here, but that's what you would have to do. Both the 5.5 to the 9th and the 10 to the 6th to the 9th. Last but not least, 1.5 divided by 5 is 0.3. And then I'm going to subtract exponents, top minus bottom. I'd end up with 10 to the negative 12th. Too big, too small, just right. This number is too small. It needs to get bigger, which means the exponent needs to get smaller. So 3 by 1 decimal place smaller is 10 to the negative 13th. Good luck on your test. If you have any questions or concerns, make sure that you talk to your teacher. And good luck.